Hello,
Hey,
Matt.
Bill.
How you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm good. Baby's treating you well?
Things are good. Actually, he had a picture last night with, his name's Burke Blackwell Lewis. And he got a picture last night with Morton Blackwell and Ken Blackwell. So we'll see.
So you're in the heart of CPAC.
Yeah, today was CPAC. As we're taping this, there's actually some sort of FreedomWorks blogger bash taking place. I'm not there because I'm here.
I'm sorry to keep you away.
That's okay. CPAC is incredibly overwhelming. It's one of those things where you kind of have to pace yourself a little bit. There are just thousands and thousands of people. Everywhere you turn, there's someone that knows you, someone that you know, someone whose name you can't remember, but they know you. And so it's a bit taxing. And today, not a lot of places to sit. I went to the blogger area, and all the desks are gone by the time I got there. So it's really funny, man. I mean, I admire people like Weigel can go anywhere and be a productive blogger. I am most productive at my house or at my desk at my office. Like I don't really.
I've always found conventions and conferences very hard to physically blog at. There's too much going on. You don't have time to sit and think.
For me too. It's so. I mean, other people obviously do it. They get something out of it. Now, there were a couple things that happened today that were pretty cool. I mean, I don't feel like I was as productive as I would have been if I was sitting here just watching CPAC online. But Don Rumsfeld had a big, about 10 of us, 10 conservative bloggers. Mary Catherine Ham, Philip Klein, Ed Morrissey, a bunch of top bloggers over to his office. And we had about an hour and a half meeting with Rumsfeld. And then later today I interviewed Richard Dreyfuss, Academy Award-winning actor who was at CPAC.
No, I saw on Twitter that he was there. I mean, Dreyfuss has always been known as a very liberal presence in Hollywood. Do you know why he was there?
He told me that he was there to learn, and he said that he is not a liberal or a conservative. Then he did say other things like, if you haven't changed your positions in 25 years, then you need to go to a psychiatrist because people change over time. So he did imply that he had changed, but he also said that I think he called himself a conserva, liberal, radical, middle of the road or something like that. And he did, but he was patriotic. He called America the greatest political miracle in history, things like that during our conversation. So, but utterly fascinating. I mean, Philip Klein
did he actually say something that indicated he was adopting a conservative position on something that was new for him?
Nope. He just said, I asked him if he's a conservative, and he said, I'm not a member, meaning I'm not a member of the conservative movement, but in some ways I am conservative. But I'll be honest with you, and you can go to, I blogged about this at Politics Daily, and you can look at some of the YouTube clips, some of which include some interesting language. He did say that he was concerned about some sex and stuff on television that he thought was a little bit much on network TV, like Sex in the City and stuff like that. But by and large, it was sort of enigmatic. But Philip Klein made a very good point today on Twitter, because Donald Trump, came in at the last minute and ended up getting a speech at CPAC. And, Philip Klein was basically arguing that conservatives make fun of Hollywood and say they hate actors, but then they bend over backwards. If anybody with, any connection to Hollywood comes around, they're treated with, godlike status.
Well, I mean, Dennis Miller, John Ratzenberger, Victoria Jackson.
Yeah. I mean, I have to say Dennis Miller is, he's really cool and super smart. And I was just listening, he was just on Adam Carolla's show recently. So I would recommend that.
Well, let's get back to the Donald Rumsfeld session you were at. Obviously, he's on his book tour right now. and not getting a lot of praise from the liberal blogosphere as far as what he had to say in his book. But what's the theme of the conservative questioning for him? Because there's some neocons that weren't happy with Donald Rumsfeld, like John McCain and Bill Kristol. Was he getting any kind of aggressive questioning from the group?
No, it was incredibly cordial. Rummy was wearing and by the way, I tweeted out this. There's this app on Twitter or on Apple on the iPhone. It's called Photo Booth. So you can. It's like in the old days when you used to go to a photo booth and you would take 4 pictures of yourself, doing different poses. And I actually made one of those of him because he was hilarious. The way he was sitting, his gestures, and he wore he was wearing a dress shirt, but then he wore a fleece vest, which was a little bit trendy. And he was he's super funny, super good spirits. It wasn't a confrontational interview, but there were certainly substantive and a lot of questions.
Keep going.
A lot of questions about the surge. I mean, I asked him about McCain, and I'm getting ready to transcribe some of that now. But he was very critical of McCain, did not hesitate to push back, and essentially argued that John McCain, that part of his campaign strategy was to run against the Bush administration, and that some of his positions might have been political more than substantive. He said if all you have is a hammer, you think every problem is a nail, meaning that I think he basically said McCain got it in his head that we needed more troops and just never gave up on that. Rumsfeld did say that it is very clear the surge worked, but he is not convinced that had they surged sooner that it would have made a difference. So a lot of nuanced positions, but here's the other thing too that I thought was interesting that he told me. He basically conceded that the Bush administration did a poor job of handling public relations, which is something that they usually don't admit to. I mean, when I had Karl Rove on my podcast, we talked about that, and a lot of conservatives still to this day are angry with Bush because Bush felt that he was above responding to some of his critics and that he would let history sort it out. But when he failed to push back on some of these attacks, he wasn't the only one who suffered. Republicans and conservatives also suffered.
But what attack did they not push back on at the time? They pushed back on everything.
Geez, I've tried to block this out. I don't know that we should relitigate it, but let me just, I would just say that I'm of the opinion that that what happened is starting in 2003 when the Democrats, when Howard Dean and, because remember, after 9/11, Bush was incredibly popular, and that really sustained through the invasion of Iraq, and it really started to change when Howard Dean started aggressively trying to carve out this niche of being from the Democratic wing of the Democratic Party. And basically, Bush, I think it was about a year where Bush didn't, because he didn't have a primary, he was going to be the Republican nominee, didn't respond. And Democrats were just beating this drum of attacks against him. And anyway, that's I'm not alone in that. That's a kind of a common conservative criticism of him.
Well, outside of your Rumsfeld experience, I got the sense from the coverage of CPAC that Trump was the big news of the day, but do you have a different sense of it being on the ground there?
Again, I mean, it's the worst. I go to it kind of because it's sort of required. But it's I could have covered CPAC much better watching it on the web or on C-SPAN if it was on C-SPAN. It's I was in the room when Trump spoke. It was very tepid. I think it was exciting simply because it was a surprise and because he's not a typical conservative. It's not Rick Santorum again. But honestly, there wasn't a lot of energy in the audience. It was
I was at CPAC in 2007, and I remember Gingrich was the last speaker then, and he walked in the room and the crowd just exploded upon his entrance. You got to say these are his people. So you're saying that it wasn't like that with Trump. There was sort of who are you really kind of
It was like a sideshow. It was like if Alec Baldwin had shown up and did like a Jack Donaghy impersonation. People were like amused, but I don't think people took it seriously. It was kind of a sideshow, like a little bit of a gimmick. But I will say this about Newt. And he spoke today. I didn't see him, but I can only imagine he did great because he always does. Somebody, maybe Philip Klein, said his problem's never, maybe it was Jim Gary, I don't know, his problem's never been that he doesn't give a good speech. I mean, it almost doesn't matter.
I personally thought he went into his whole green conservatism bit and this whole let's abolish the EPA and have an environmental solutions agency, and you then prescribes to describe something that is what the EPA already does. But I thought the whole green conservatism section of the speech, which was a lot of it, is what he ended on, was kind of meandering, and it didn't seem to light the crowd up. But again, I wasn't there.
I can't even imagine why he would go there with that audience.
When I saw him there last time, it was just red meat after red meat after red meat. I mean, certainly he had some of that in the speech and calling Obama embarrassing on foreign policy and stuff like that. But it was a wonkier speech than I had seen him give at CPAC previously.
Well, I will say one little gimmick that Newt has that really works for him is everybody else, they're announced, and they play music, and they walk from behind the curtain, right? They come out from backstage before they give their speech. Newt comes in the front door. So they start playing the eye. They play the eye. He does it every year. They play the Eye of the Tiger, the Survivor song from Rocky III or whatever. And Newt walks through the crowd. And it's and usually standing over, and it's really a good showmanship there. Bill,
going back to Trump briefly, because a lot of folks in the traditional media have been saying if Trump runs, it's going to be so dominating, he attracts so much media attention, and he'll completely shake up the race. But what you're telling me is that in the conservative base, they're just going to kind of shrug their shoulders at it and kind of hope he goes away.
I think that, first of all, if Donald Trump runs, I don't think the conservative movement is his natural base. So I don't know that having a lukewarm response today really means anything. Donald Trump, I don't think anybody believes is a conservative. He was critical of Obama. Did you watch any of the speech?
I did. Okay. If you had never seen Donald Trump before, you would think he was conservative down the line. And if you go to his new website where he's soliciting feedback, he's got this graphic that you can put on your website where he says, it's cold outside. What is this about global warming? It's sort of very rudimentary conservative talking point.
He said that, he didn't say Obama, but he said that America had become a laughing stock. He was very much going after China as well. So, but it's just, people aren't stupid. He's not going to be the conservative candidate. It's just not going to happen. And I think it was a publicity stunt today. And I'm sure it worked. I'm sure he'll be on all the cable shows and stuff. And
but do you think you think he will actually run? Not that we can get into that guy's crazy head, but it does seem he's doing a little bit more than he has in previous publicity stunt presidential campaign teases.
I think he might. We'll have to wait and see. But
if I was a Republican, if I was a conservative, I'd be worried that if he gets in and Michelle Bachmann gets in. And Herman Cain is there, that the whole race is going to look like a sideshow. That the party's not going to look like a serious party.
And speaking of the sideshow, today, another undercurrent was the whole Rick Santorum versus Sarah Palin thing. I don't know if you saw this, but it's just so tiring. and apparently they've made nice now, but there was a little bit of a dispute between Rick Santorum and Sarah Palin, and and again, I mean, you're right though. I mean, there are all these candidates, like, we don't even know if they're going to run, but it's impacting the race. I mean, people who are flirting with running are actually impacting the race for the people who really are going to run. So it's so weird. Politics is changing so much. I mean, I don't know of a lot of analogies to what's happening this year. I mean, the Trump thing, for example. I don't know, Bill. Do you have anything come to mind historically of something like this happening?
Well, I mean, it's maybe not quite as colorful, but in 1991, when George Bush Sr. had these sky-high approval ratings, and none of the Democratic A-list was going to run, there was a general sense that this very diminished field was going, and it was kind of pathetic. And in 1988, they called them the Seven Dwarfs. There was always this perennial notion that Democrats didn't have, real people of stature run against these titans of the Republican Party. And I mean, it's not that Obama's numbers were in the stratosphere or anything. Certainly not the way George Bush's numbers were in 1991. But there does seem to be a sense that no one quite believes they can take him out, and therefore no one of grand stature is really going at this. And that may not be the way the folks at CPAC are looking at it, but I do get the sense from you and from others, and maybe you're feeling in the room, that there's a sense of uncertainty and dissatisfaction. We maybe think we do have a shot at taking out Obama this year, and that he's overreached, and we can reclaim the center of the country again, but no one's stepping up to the plate.
Yeah, and then you have people who are like, playing games with running. Is Sarah Palin really serious about running? I don't know. Is Mike Huckabee really serious about running? I don't know. We know that Rick Santorum is serious. We know that Tim Pawlenty is serious. We know that Mitt Romney is. Newt. I mean, I think Newt's running. I think that's pretty clear. But it's just so weird. It's so late. I mean, I think 4 years ago today, Bill, Barack Obama announced for president. And but that wasn't a surprise. I mean, that was the official announcement. But people knew he was running before that. And Republicans are so far behind that. Hey, I did want to mention something else that is a blog story, and it goes along with CPAC. And as you know, Bill, I've been chronicling this GOProud versus some of the social
Family Research Council.
Right. And so I guess yesterday there was a story where Grover Norquist told Jackie Kucinich in Roll Call, called the groups that are boycotting them loser people and loser organizations. And then Salon's Dave Weigel listed the groups that are boycotting, and it's like the Heritage Foundation, Family Research Council, Jim DeMint. So I wrote something about that. And then today,
this is the biggest, breakaway faction.
Right.
I mean, CPAC's usually been a very unifying space for conservatives. I don't think there's been a conservative group that has boycotted before. Is that wrong?
No, I mean, there have always been some people who are unhappy, but when you have, it's not a big list, but when you have, the Heritage Foundation, arguably the biggest, most important think tank on the right, when you have the Family Research Council, arguably the most important social conservative group, which would be 1/3 of, the three-legged stool that you've heard so much about. And then when you have Jim DeMint, arguably the most important conservative in the U.S. Senate, boycotting, I think you got to take it seriously. I don't think you can dismiss them as loser organizations. Now, I did talk to Grover later yesterday, and he walked it back a little bit, but the story is what it is. And then, Bill, today, the latest is Red State's Eric Erickson who had largely stayed out of this debate, sounded off and went after GOProud. Apparently, GOProud had given an interview where they really took the gloves off for the first time and went after conservatives, social conservatives, and one of them, Cleta Mitchell, called her a nasty bigot. And Cleta is a very prominent FEC attorney. She's on the board of the American Conservative Union that sponsors CPAC. And this drew Eric Erickson into it hardcore, and he really came out against GOProud. And it must have worked, Bill, because GOProud tonight issued a statement apologizing for the attack on Cleta Mitchell. So
I mean,
that's the latest.
Folks who don't know, GOProud is a gay Republican organization, and they've tried to define themselves as being a really conservative gay Republican organization, unlike, say, the Log Cabin Republicans, which have always had a reputation for being moderate Republicans, and that's why GOProud really wanted to be at CPAC. And other conservatives have said, "Hey, if you're conservative, I don't care if you're gay or straight, you're conservative." And other folks like Jim DeMint have said otherwise. So I take it from that response that GOProud's not trying to pick a fight with the rest of the conservative movement. They're still trying to be seen as bona fide conservatives.
They are, and but Eric Erickson is poking some holes in this, and I'm sure we'll link to this piece. But he's pointing out that that they maybe aren't as conservative as they on other issues as well. As they might want people to know or to think.
Now, is this the talk of the floor of CPAC? Are people lamenting that there's a boycott? Are they upset that GOProud is there? Are they standing by GOProud and said, Heritage doesn't want to be here, screw them? Or is it just not a main?
No, see, that's the interesting thing. That's the interesting thing. You could be at CPAC and not even know this is happening. I mean, I think this is a significant and important debate that's happening. But you could be at CPAC the whole time and really not know that this is going on. The other thing that happened today, Bill, was, when I left the Rumsfeld office, they told me to expect a surprise introducer for Secretary Rumsfeld. And it was Dick Cheney. And I don't know... because I was talking to Richard Dreyfuss when this all went down, but some of the Ron Paul supporters were apparently they were going to try to stage some sort of a walkout and protest against Rumsfeld. I don't know how that went down or what, but there were definitely rumors that some of the Ron Paul supporters were going to try to somehow protest Rumsfeld. So there is, there is, some... dissension, at this event. So
I can't see why everyone tolerates Ron Paul supporters if they can't tolerate GOProud.
It's so weird, and it's also so weird. Like some of the stories leading up to this, which is that you've got the Muslim Brotherhood infiltration of CPAC.
Well, I mean, obviously, you have to stand up against that. I mean, if Sharia law comes to CPAC with all is law.
Well, it's so funny, though, that apparently some of the same people supporting Sharia law are also really into gay stuff, which seems to be
gay Sharia law is the worst.
Contradictory.
Oh, it's so annoying.
Because there aren't any gays in Iran, and yet this is somehow impacting CPAC. It's really weird how it's happening. So I think that's pretty much it. It's incredibly. It's incredibly tiring. I go, you got to be there, you got to cover it.
You don't seem happy. You don't seem like the happy Matt Lewis that I'm used to, I have to say.
It's later. It's late.
I tend to get you more midday.
A few drinks last night. Let me ask you, though, how are you with conferences? I mean, you were at a conference the other week. I mean, you're like me, right?
I'm toy like you. I have very mixed feelings about them. I find them exhausting, constant small talk, can't actually write, don't actually get a real perspective on the event, but everyone's always asking you for perspective on the event. When you play
and here's the other thing too. I mean, I'm not, I know that I know that I'm not a big deal in general, but if there's ever a place where I'm like a minor celebrity, it would be at CPAC. So, like, where everybody knows who I am, basically. And the thing is, a lot of times, see, I think that, if I'm not saying, I'm not on TV every day or anything like that, but I think that sometimes when people see you, like, if I saw when Tucker Carlson was on, I would see him like every day, and you sort of like him, and you're gonna like ID him immediately, but they may not know who you are or be able to. It's just a weird phenomenon, and like I say, I don't know how Weigel does it. Like people like Weigel, I really admire them. They go, or like Philip Klein's another one from American Spectator. They go to these conferences and they just bang out copy and like blog posts. I don't know how they do it. It's
a certain, a personality type and approach to life where you just there's just no separation between your blogging and your your personal your social interactions. And I've never.
What I bet it is too. Way. I bet you like they're the type of people who could just pick up and go out of town tomorrow to hang out at a friend's house or go to a friend's wedding, and like they'll just sleep on someone's couch or, well, I mean, like I would never do that. I need like advance notice and 4 seasons, and you know what I mean. So I just think that's part of it. I think like there are like rugged like bloggers, and then there are bloggers like me, not terribly rugged. Maybe we're in the same camp.
But speaking of you, Matt Lewis,
because this show is all about me, I think.
Speaking of you being a minor celebrity, you made news this week because when AOL bought Huffington Post, and you are, as of today, an employee of AOL, writing for Politics Daily.
Yes.
I was having a discussion with my wife on that day. I wonder what will happen with Matt Lewis with Politics Daily, and we thought that they would beg you to stick around and want you to be a prominent conservative voice at the newly rebranded Huffington Post. And maybe that was still the plan, but you certainly preempted that by saying, I will in no way, no how work under the iron fist of Arianna Huffington, and you lined up a gig with...
Read my lips.
So now you're with Tucker Carlson's Daily Caller starting out soon.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't want to press you to get into private conversations that are not appropriate to discuss publicly. But was this just your gut reaction, or did you really have a sense that there wasn't going to be a place for you, ideologically speaking, at AOL with Arianna at the helm?
No, several things. Where to begin? So, because it's a complex thing, and it's your livelihood. I have a 3-week-old baby now, and so, you taking the chance, roll the dice, whether or not you're going to have a job, and whether or not you're going to have a job that allows you to exercise your artistic, creative integrity and freedom. Maybe you roll the dice in some examples. Maybe you don't if you have a 3-week-old baby. But my thing, there were really two factors. Number one was simply that I am a proud conservative. I know I'm iconoclastic. I know that I don't always take, I think Dave Weigel said I was an unpredictable conservative, which I actually took as a compliment. Because it's way better than being called inconsistent. That's unpredictable is much better. But so I'm perfectly in fact, I've enjoyed working at AOL, where it's ostensibly a mainstream, unbiased news outlet, and they allowed me to do my thing. They did not stifle or try to. In fact, they promoted my stuff. I've loved it, actually. I have nothing but good things to say about Politics Daily. My editors there have been terrific. But Arianna Huffington is a hardcore liberal. And the notion of working for her is a bridge too far for me. And even if they wanted me to stay on, and that's not clear at all, I don't know what's going to happen at Politics Daily. It may not even exist, or maybe it will. Nobody knows. I don't think anybody knows. And it's actually unclear, as far as I know, whether or not Arianna will even be running it. That's the rumor, but I don't know that anybody knows that.
Well, my understanding is that she was running essentially everything media-oriented involving AOL. That she was getting control of the whole media empire.
That is my understanding, too, but I don't know if that's actually the truth. I mean, it probably is. It stands to reason. But anyway, sort of a long way of saying that the most important reason for this was the sort of philosophical reason that here's the thing. I think that AOL underestimated that she is a liberal and that it's perceived that she's a liberal. And I do think here that there's a double standard. That if you're a liberal like Arianna Huffington, it is acceptable for you to go run an ostensibly center mainstream media outlet, and nobody thinks twice about it. I mean, I did, but the executives, the corporate, they're okay with it. I don't think the same thing would be true on the right. I don't think that Andrew Breitbart would go run Yahoo.
Well, Roger Ailes used to run something at NBC, right?
MSNBC, right?
Yeah, he did. He was there earlier when it was America's Talking.
I don't remember that, but I do know that Roger Ailes brought Chris Matthews on,
right?
At MSNBC. But Roger Ailes was certainly a Republican political operative, no doubt about that. I don't think he was a commentator so much.
No, he wasn't a public face, but he'd been involved in Republican presidential campaigns.
Yeah. But there certainly are examples. I think it's much easier. I mean, if you look at Chris Matthews, who worked for Jimmy Carter and Tip O'Neill, and George Stephanopoulos, who was, Bill Clinton's press secretary. I mean, I think it's much easier for liberals to kind of make that jump into the media. And so anyway, that was my big thing. It's sort of like a matter of integrity. Like, I'm not saying I have to work for Town Hall or Red State, but I can't go work for the Huffington.
No, I don't want to make you second guess a major life decision. But I mean, your premise is that Arianna is a, quote, hardcore liberal, and sort of the question is being raised now, is that actually the case? Might this be a new incarnation of Arianna?
When she used to be a conservative, right?
You might be too young to remember that.
She was a Newt Gingrich acolyte.
Yeah, I'm old enough to remember Arianna being a conservative. I saw Arianna debate liberal feminists in Washington, D.C. when I was in my 20s.
How are liberals reacting to this? I mean, what's the left's opinion of the AOL merger?
Well, I don't think there's a uniform one. You're not seeing as intense a reaction as you did when Keith Olbermann's left MSNBC, when almost immediately there was deep dismay and quick blame pointed towards Comcast for forcing him out. Some of that's dissipated because he's now at Current, which is partially on my Comcast. But Arianna still holds a lot of liberals still hold her in very high regard, and are seeing this as an example of success of liberal media infrastructure. I mean, people sometimes forget that the modern attempt to build a robust liberal media infrastructure has been premised on it being a for-profit enterprise to show that liberal commentary and liberal opinion journalism can be profitable. Air America was not a nonprofit. your top blogs are not nonprofits. They sell ads, and they don't pick and choose what ads they take.
But this profit thing, Bill, is a double-edged sword, and this is another criticism, and it's not ideological, but it's a blogger story, which is the notion that that analysis, thoughtful analysis, is taking a back seat to just content, and that the Huffington Post model is to like they had this story the other day. It was a search engine story that I saw, and the whole story was called "When Does the Super Bowl Start?" And the goal was that people were going to be Googling "When does the Super Bowl start?"
Right.
And it was all of these keywords, and it really could have just been a sentence, but it was a whole. And they have free. They get bloggers to blog for free, and so there is a question like. Is this model essentially, creating a world where it's all about kind of cheap content or aggregating and not about analysis? That's what I've loved about Politics Daily. I wrote a piece the other day, with the backdrop being the revolution in Egypt. And I wrote a piece the other day about how conservatives are split. As you know, conservatives have been split over this. And you've got the Bill Kristols of the world saying we need to support freedom fighters, in the streets, people who want freedom, protesters. And you've got the Glenn Becks saying things like, well, no, it's going to become, the Islamists are going to take over. And I pointed out that, there's a tradition of conservatives, if you look at Thomas Paine, who, Ronald Reagan was a fan of Thomas Paine's, versus Edmund Burke. And they very much differed over the French Revolution. And that's not a sexy story. I don't know if 5 people read that story, but I wrote it, and I just wonder if there's going to be a place in the world for stories like that in a couple years if this model continues.
Well, and I think that's there is another liberal concern with where Huffington Post is going and has gone. That is based on that. So the one notion is that this is an example of a successful liberal media enterprise. It's so profitable that it garners $350 million and becomes part of the AOL empire. The other notion is that it ceased to be predominantly a liberal media enterprise because it's just content and clicks for content and click's sake.
Right.
And a lot of the political stuff has been marginalized for whatever Lindsay Lohan did today, or what's the latest Tiger Woods mistress they can uncover and all that sort of thing.
Right.
And it's hard to do. It's hard to definitively say which one is it because it's kind of everything. A lot of folks have focused on the notion that the bloggers don't get paid. Myself being one of those unpaid bloggers. But in many ways, the blogging on the site, and maybe this means we shouldn't be talking about it here on the Week of Blog. Huffington Post really isn't a blog, and it has blogs on it. It started off being more about the bloggers and their blog commentaries and less about the news headline aggregation. But as of late, the blogging is very much marginalized. It's not. I don't think it's what drives the traffic. I don't see Huffington Post blog posts generally causing a lot of chatter. Obviously, occasionally one pops up, but they do have.
But and by the way, let me say, Bill, I've actually written a couple pieces for the Huffington Post for free,
unpaid.
So I'm part of the problem,
right? But they do have they do have a paid media staff. They do have paid reporters, and they drive more traffic with their own news scoops.
Including Howard Feynman, right?
Right.
He's a big recent.
Well, Feynman's not scooping me a little bit, but Ryan Grimm and Sam Stein and Zach Carter and Amanda Turkle and Arthur Delaney, those folks, tend to have most of their original content. Feynman's sort of one of the more star hires, and I think gives them an instant portal onto cable TV. A little sense of here's a guy who's on the inside who understands the Beltway and whatnot. When
I was at townhall.com, we called them user blogs, but we had the same idea. We just didn't execute it as well as Huffington
Right.
Post. It's not like it sounds worse than it is. I mean, you can make an argument that, look, if you're a full-time blogger, you sort of have to meet deadlines, you have to work weekends, you have to go to conferences. But if you're some guy who actually has a real job but is interested in something and you want to forum, then maybe it's a great thing to be able to blog at Huffington Post, and you don't expect to get paid.
Well, I mean, when Huffington Post started, and I wasn't there at the very beginning, but I was invited to be on fairly early within the first year. There weren't that many Huffington Post bloggers, so when you posted a blog at Huffington Post, it was on the home page for a decent chunk of time, and people saw it.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, there are thousands of Huffington Post bloggers, and there's a lot of.
Yeah, and I get a sense that stuff gets buried there. Like,
oh yeah,
like you could write something there, but no one knows it's there.
Absolutely,
unless you tell them.
That's my point is that it's primarily not driven by the blogging. That's not why people go. And most folks that blog there don't get a lot of exposure for what they put up there.
But they get to say they're a Huffington Post blogger, and
they can. They can. That is true. You get to be asked if you get a cut of the proceeds, which of course you don't. But to me, the bigger unknown is what's going to happen with their paid media staff. What's going to be the editorial direction that takes when they're under the AOL umbrella. I mean, they do liberal opinion journalism right now, although it's certainly not Democratic Party opinion journalism. They're very tough on the Obama administration and the Democratic Party, but coming from the left. Are they going to mix it up in some way? Is there going to be? Are they going to try to rebrand what they're doing? I mean, that I don't think we quite know yet. But at minimum, you know. Well, however you come down on what Huffington Post has become and where it's going to be, I do think it still is an example of a core of it being liberal commentary and liberal opinion journalism being built up into a successful media enterprise. When Air America went bankrupt, there was like a falling on the right. You know, this proves that liberal talk radio can't succeed. But Tom Hartman's still around, and Ed Schultz is still around, and Stephanie Miller's still around. And Bill Press is still around, so the format remains, even though the Air America business enterprise failed. And obviously Rachel Maddow did well, and a lot of top bloggers are still very successful. Last
night I went to this thing, the Weyrich Awards dinner, honoring Paul Weyrich, and he started a thing called, it was called America's Voice TV, I think. It was before Fox News, and the idea was a conservative TV network, and it didn't work. But some of the people who started on that show ended up going to Fox News or even other networks. Sometimes these things, just because they don't work in that exact entity, doesn't mean that you're not actually advancing the cause.
Right, and I think 10 years ago there wasn't a market. As much as conservatives like to call, the mainstream media liberal, what NBC and CBS and what ABC do is not what Ed Schultz and Keith Olbermann and Arianna Huffington were doing. They're distinctly different products. So a more clearly liberal media enterprise like what...
I would argue that the mainstream stuff is more insidious, but...
That debate is
the overtly leftist content I can easily block out.
But there's been an attempt in the past decade to build a modern liberal media infrastructure that certainly does not rival the conservative media infrastructure yet. I mean, obviously the right wing, the conservative talk radio audience is far larger than liberal talk radio audience. Fox News ratings are bigger than MSNBC primetime's ratings, but there is a market for this type of liberal media that did not exist 10 years ago, and there was a question whether it could be created, whether this market did even exist, and it does exist. So whatever happens to Huffington Post now, if they decide to not serve that market as much anymore, and to be a more broader middle brow type of site, the market is still there for someone else to try to serve. I don't think the market goes away.
So I guess just to wrap this up, the last part of it is that I will be going to the Daily Caller.
Right.
And a funny thing happens when you announce that you're doing something. Like, all of a sudden you start hearing people tell you that it was either a good idea or a bad idea. People, like, oh my God, you're going there? I heard this. And the great thing is, since I announced it, I've had so many positive comments, people telling me they thought it's a good move, that it would be a good fit for me. And also just people, everybody I've talked to, and a lot of people who are mainstream journalists too, have told me how much they like and respect Tucker. And so it's one of those things where even today at CPAC, a lot of people telling me it's apparently a great place to work. It's a very fun environment.
Now we should disclose that you were hired along with Mickey Kaus, who has some affiliation with this very bloggingheads.tv site.
Right, one of the founders, right?
Right. And while I was very excited that you're there, Matt, for them to hire Mickey, who is not a traditional conservative, I mean, he might even still call himself liberal for all I know, but obviously an extremely idiosyncratic one. That's more of an interest. That's a bit more of a different ideological approach that Tucker seems to be taking.
Yeah, I haven't given a lot of thought to that, but let me ask you. What do you read into that?
Well, I mean, it seems like an attempt on Tucker's part to, broaden the appeal of the site and try to pick up, a piece of the ideological spectrum that, doesn't have a lot of media outlets. There isn't, a place for the cranky liberal that hates liberals. I mean, there's plenty. You see a lot of those folks on, op-ed pages, and they get a lot of FaceTime on cable TV. We don't have a lot of standalone media that's directly tailored to that segment. And I assume Tucker's trying to reach out to them and have a bit of a more distinctive brand than some of the other conservative sites that are out there.
The other thing that's cool, by the way, is my former colleague at townhall.com, Mary Catherine Ham, recently went to the Daily Caller.
They're building quite the all-star lineup.
They are, and she's a regular on O'Reilly and stuff. So hopefully I can contribute to the team. I just want to go out there every day, Bill, and give it my best. And good Lord willing, we'll win a couple of ball games.
I mean, do you have a different objective, a different assignment than you had at Politics Daily or at Town Hall, or they're saying, Matt Lewis, do what you do?
I let Matt be Matt. That's what I hope. I mean, I loved what I was, I got my thing, what I do. I'd like to do that. But when you work for somebody, you do what they tell you to do. So, you never know what the future may hold. But I think, generally speaking, if you like what you've been getting, just come to Daily Caller and read me there. And if you don't, then go to
stick with AOL
Huffington Post.
All right, well, we'll leave it on that note. Matt, it's always good to talk to you.
Good talking to you, man. Sorry if I was a little cranky tonight.
I understand.
Being around people
long day.
Does that to me.
Got to talk to someone else.
I'm a blogger. I need to be like in my blogger cave. So.
And you got 2 more days of CPAC left.
Yep. All right, my friend.
Have fun.
All right, thanks.
Bye.